on the other one, you bastard!
So, the 3DS is dead! To me, this is actually quite melancholic. The 3DS was the first game console where I felt like I could self-identify as a gamer. My family was rather anti-game until a mate of mine convinced them that a DS could be used as an educational device. I mean, I guess you've got recipe games and brain training and such, but I'm surprised they fell for such bullshit anyway. But I never put much stock into the DS when it first came out, and most of my current DS games were purchased in the past few years from Facebook Marketplace sales. But yes, the 3DS was the first time I actively set aside time to play video games. It was the first time that I truly felt part of a community, and as such, the fact that its production has ceased has got me feeling a little down. Sure, the Switch is by far a superior console, not just for the fact I can actually record footage for it now, but part of me will always miss this little thing. So as such, I thought it would be a good idea to take a trip down memory lane and celebrate some of the best of what the console has to offer. Strap in, boys, because this console has a shit ton of games, and here's just a glimpse of what it has to offer.
You're now entering diagnosis. Insanity.
Quick housekeeping before we begin though. Look, I own a lot of games. Like, a lot of them. I haven't got around to playing most of them. As such, this isn't a definitive list. This is just out of the games I have currently played. Eventually, I will get around to updating this list in a few years, but I wanted this to be a time capsule for my thoughts and feelings now. Secondly, I'll be primarily using either trailer footage from Nintendo's and other companies' official channels, or footage that I have captured on other consoles. Unfortunately, my 2DS does not have a capture card installed, since apparently the guy who used to make them quit after they changed the laws in Japan. From what I gather, it's illegal to sell modified hardware, or even charge for a modification service. Or maybe it's illegal to modify it outright? I don't know. Point is, some copyright fuckery is going to be involved, so thank fuck I've moved away from weekly uploads, since I've got no clue when this is going to go up. And finally, this is a personal list. This is just what I think, and it's perfectly alright for you to have a different list to mine. You'd think this would go without saying, but every time I pull this shit with my Transformers content, some fuckwit in the comments is always trying to correct me. That's not the point, mate. If you don't like it, make your own f***ing list. Anyway, without further ado,
Number 20!
when people describe fantasy life, they often compare it to the quest progression systems in Skyrim. Having played both, I can pretty easily say this is not the case. And the game is all the better for it. The paths you progress are quite linear, however the choice of which path you go down is yours to make. Fantasy Life is, essentially, a cozy action RPG with 12 different paths, or lives, to choose from. The story itself isn't anything special and the characters aren't that memorable, but the warm atmosphere really draws you in. It's the perfect game to kick back and relax to, not too dissimilar from Animal Crossing or Harvest Moon, or I guess Story of Seasons since Harvest Moon doesn't exist anymore, just with a slight Western RPG twist. It's criminal that this game didn't get a sequel or revival on the Nintendo Switch, and the reason why is the most frustrating part. They were making a sequel for mobile, however it underwent a 2-year reworking period that turned it into what seems to be a free-to-play microtransaction-heavy, typical mobile game slog. Furthermore, it doesn't seem to have been released in the West in the 2 years since its debut, and I doubt the company has any reason to do so. Ouch.
Number 19!
Okay, so this list is going to feature a lot of series that I've dipped my toe into but haven't actually been able to go the full distance with. First up is the first Shantae game, and despite its age I still love this game. Already this was a quite prolific virtual console release, since it had never been released prior and the cartridge price online wasn't the best. In fact, it still isn't, to say the least. Either way, it's a hella fun platformer with loads of cool mechanics. The sprite work is immaculate, perfectly capturing the awesome way forward character design. Seriously, these guys are highly regarded for a reason. The music has that classic Jake Kaufman charm. Seriously, can this man do no wrong? I've heard complaints about the progression and the map system, but for its time I don't really think it's that big of an issue, especially for such an old handheld game. It's amazing what they were able to achieve with the Game Boy Color, end of console lifespan or no. This borderline looks like a Game Boy Advanced release. And yes, I'm counting virtual console games on this list. It's my list and I can do whatever the hell I want.
Number 18!
These days, the Nintendo Switch is very well known for its meaty indie lineup. However, many newer fans don't realize the first console where it really took off was the 3DS. Sure, you had a few indie hits on the Wii and a few on the Wii U, kinda, but the 3DS for a while was considered the best way to play several indie games portably. The SteamWorld franchise was one of the first plunges into this independent explosion, and I have fond memories with its premiere title. No, that doesn't count. Unfortunately, I've yet to play any of its sequels, even though I've downloaded all but Quest. But putting that aside, SteamWorld Dig is well worth playing for the atmosphere alone. The steampunk aesthetic injects so much personality into the world, and the characters, although they don't have a lot of dialogue, really leave an impression on you. The gameplay as well is very engaging. The combination of Terraria meets meets Metroidvania works surprisingly well, especially for someone like me who eventually gets bored with open-natured, craft-based experiences. It provides just enough uniqueness to each playthrough without going into full roguelike territory. Gotta admit, not the biggest fan of roguelikes, it's just a personal taste. At the end of the journey though, I was still craving more, and fortunately for me, more digging-based adventures await me in the future. Just gotta find the time, eventually.
Number 17!
The announcement of Super Nintendo games on the 3DS wasn't met with that much fanfare, but to me it was an incredibly big deal. Granted, not many have been released over the years, and with the Switch Online service I doubt any more will be, but the lineup was still something I was incredibly hyped for. Pilot Wings was my first jump into this emulated system, and despite being really short for a home console game, even taking into account the year it initially came out, it's still an absolute blast to play. The concept and execution are pretty simple on paper, parallax scrolling flat ground, with a sprite-work plane or jetpack guy or paratrooper. But given the limitations of the hardware, it still holds up remarkably well. Flying around feels very fun, and the 16-bit graphics really hit me in the nostalgia bone, even though I never grew up with such consoles. If you've never played Pilot Wings, the footage you see before you will probably not convince you to play such, and I only gave it a shot because it was free with a few Club Nintendo points. Yeah, remember when that was a thing? Either way though, it was a blast, and I highly recommend looking past how it, looks, and giving it a chance.
Number 16!
I'm weird. You know it, I know it, the YouTube algorithm knows it, and refuses to promote any non-Transformers videos because of it. My weirdness seeps into my Zelda choices. I'm probably the only person on the planet who prefers Oracle of Seasons over Oracle of Ages. It may be because I played it first, but the world of Holodrum just seems way more vibrant and lived in when compared to whatever the Ages land was called. I also prefer the Seasons mechanic to the time travel one. Surprisingly, I find it much less confusing. And by God, the Subrosians are the cutest goddamn things you could ever imagine. I loved them so much that I took what little Lego pieces I had at the time and made my very own mosaic. Doubt it's accurate to the sprite work, but it's a treasured childhood project of mine. Regardless, even though I'd easily put Seasons over Ages in this spot, I greatly hope that both get remade using the new Link's Awakening engine. I realize I had a few negative things to say about that remake, but as far as I can tell, those issues are in relation to the original game. If they were to remake the Oracle games and maybe even redo the cancelled third game, we might just have one of the best 2D Zeldas of all time on our hands.
Number 15!
I'm gonna be honest with you, usually I don't like rhythm games. A lot of the time the gameplay doesn't seem that engaging, especially when I could easily just pull out my saxophone and learn the song myself. Furthermore, if there's even the slightest millisecond of input lag, I find it borderline unplayable. And believe me, Rhythm Thief and the Emperor's Treasure does have that input lag, but for some reason I found myself persisting thanks to the strength of its story and the charm of its presentation. It's basically what would happen if you combined Professor Layton with Lupin III and then shoved the remaining story into a rhythm game. It also helps that the music itself, although clearly designed for a rhythm game and not particularly good on its own, is very catchy. It also helped that I played this game whilst in Europe. Well, not Paris or even France, mind you, but Italy. At the very least, the atmosphere helped enhance the experience. Anyway, I was initially surprised that no one was talking about this game. From the looks of it, it seems like a long-standing franchise that I was just peeking into. But nope, it's just this and a shaved-down iOS port. To be honest, I probably wouldn't have known about this game unless it was basically forced onto my 3DS via Humble Bundle. Either way, though, I'm really glad I gave this game a chance. It never really changed my stance on rhythm games, as I still find them somewhat boring, but it was, at the very least, a jam for the ages.
Number 14!
Man, I really need to get into more Sega arcade games. These things are incredibly fun, and the soundtracks that accompany them are bloody brilliant. Maybe Yakuza 0, which I'm currently playing, will give me an excuse to try out some of the ones I've missed. Anyway, Outrun needs no introduction. Much like the previous entries, this is the perfect kind of game to unwind with. The pseudo 3D graphics hold a charm all of their own, and driving around remains as fun as ever. I also consider the 3DS port the definitive version, as although I have this on Switch, the 3DS version comes with extra tracks, and the added 3D really enhances the experience. Granted, these days I only have a new 2DS XL, since I wanted the larger screens without forking out a fortune for a feature I'd use on literally 1 or 2 games, which so happened to be this one, but damn, this game looks good in 3D. Outrun is one of the best Sega arcade games on the console, only beaten out by one other entry, and yes, as said earlier, I haven't played every Sega arcade game on the planet, but for now, Outrun is still one of the best experiences on the console, and it'll always hold a special place in my heart. I sure as hell hope it's not indicative of my eventual driving skill, though.
Number 13!
The mysterious Murasame Castle should have been a huge deal, yet for some reason it went completely under the radar as far as I recall. It was the first time the Famicom game had been localized for the West, yet all I heard at the time were cries of anger for it not being on the Wii U. Ah well, this game is special to me by virtue of being one of the few 8-bit games I could not only tolerate, but also thoroughly enjoyed. I don't know why, but I have this weird bias against a lot of NES experiences, and many landmark titles just don't seem to interest me. MMC, which has no relation to that MMC, seems to break through that with its fast-paced action, awesome music,
constant save states,
and pretty cool level design. I really hope this gets brought over to Switch Online someday, but for now owning it on 3DS will do just fine. You gotta respect the Japanese, for they know the way of the samurai.
Number 12!
Ah yes, the original Isekai, also known as A Million Ways to Die in the oppressive Mad Max alien planet. Another World has been ported to practically every console known to man, and regardless of where you played, it's easily one of the most unique experiences you'll come across. There's a reason it's been given countless awards. The presentation is top-notch. It's as close to a 90s adventure game as you can get, but it still holds up remarkably well. The story is told with no dialogue and only gestures, which makes sense since there would be no way for our strapping young protagonist to communicate. If you know what you're doing, the game is only 20 minutes long. However, the joy comes from exploring and figuring out what to do next. As long as you can get it at a cheap price, it's an adventure that everyone needs to experience at least once in their lifetime. I'm not even a fan of these sorts of games, and it still managed to captivate me. Gotta say, that's really fucking commendable.
Number 11!
Gunman Clive is a massively overlooked title, especially given its importance in the Nintendo indie scene. It was one of the first major titles to be named a Nindie, and although by current standards it's not the best Mega Man-alike you can play on the market, it's still a bloody good time. Now Gunman Clive 2, on the other hand, is the cream of the crop. The art style finally comes into its own, bringing plenty of color into the mix whilst still mimicking the Wild West wanted sketch look. The different playstyles offer plenty of variety with varying levels of difficulty. The story, or at least what little there is, feels much more streamlined. You actually feel like you're progressing as you move along. The environments are never boring, and the enemy variety that fills each level fits the theme perfectly. Any game that has a motherfucking T-Rex as a boss fight is a winner in my book. After this second outing, I'm eager to try their newest game, Extermination Force, but honestly I'm way more excited at the prospect of a sequel, if that's ever possible. I really hope they return to this franchise at some point. They've got a brawler coming out, and those aren't really my thing, so it's clear they're still making games. I really hope this isn't the end for Clive, because I need my duck fix, damn it! I need ducks!
Number 10!
Oh yeah, Galaxy Force 2, baby! Not to be confused with the most memeable Transformers show, Galaxy Force 2 is a spaceflight action Sega arcade game, and my word is it fun. It gets right to the action, and at first it's a little daunting. So you keep playing, you master the controls, you get good, so to speak. The enemy forces become nothing more than bowling pins, and that's when the game hits you with its final challenge. I remember finishing this game at 2 AM, scared out of my mind that I'd have to start over, but I pushed on and finally finished it after many months. Unfortunately, it seems as if I've deleted the replay footage, but the memory is still deeply etched into my mind. Hell, the game is worth it on the strength of its soundtrack alone. Beyond the Galaxy and Defeat are two of my favorite songs in all of gaming. Even if you don't give this game a shot, I highly recommend checking out the rearranged versions of these tracks. They are incredibly well done, although if you go straight into them, you're sadly missing out on an amazing game.
Number 9!
What can be said about Shovel Knight that hasn't been said by every other YouTuber on the planet? It's a masterful 8-bit throwback that was everything Mighty No. 9 tried to be but couldn't. It's the little Kickstarter that could, and by God could it. Shovel Knight's status as an indie icon is well deserved, with amazing gameplay, gorgeous visuals, a huge depth of content that keeps growing without a cent extra to pay, a surprisingly heartwarming story for how simple it is, and so many memorable characters. Prior to this game, I always found the Knight aesthetic somewhat homogenous, but Jesus Christ, Yacht Club games proved me wrong. And oh look, it's our pal Jake Kaufman again. No wonder the soundtrack is amazing. I would recommend playing it on a better console like the Switch, as it allows you to appreciate the pixel art way more, but for the time it was a very much acceptable way of playing it, and it remains an incredible time from start to finish.
Number 8!
In 2013, Atlas announced a permanent price drop for a few of their eShop titles. I tried looking into the reason why, but I can't seem to find anything. I vaguely remember it being in relation to a corporate restructuring and consolidation of licenses, but whether that's true or just the Mandela effects, I don't know. However, it was through this price drop that I was introduced to a true gem of a series, Etrian Odyssey. Untold isn't a particularly robust game in terms of its presentation, but much like many of my favorites on this list, its atmosphere is unparalleled. The mechanic of drawing your own map as you go is a brilliant concept, and it perfectly complemented the expert balance of tranquility in design and fear of the unknown. What's even better is that as it's a remake of the first game, there's a new voice-acted story with characters that are actually quite likable. I've heard a few criticisms against this, since apparently the true way to play Etrian Odyssey is with no story and your own characters. But I tried that with Etrian Mystery Dungeon and got bored quickly. Now I realize that this isn't supposed to be one of the highest regarded entries in the series, with many touting 4 and Untold 2 as the superior experiences. I've yet to play either of those, however, which is why I intend to revisit this list once I've thoroughly gone through my library. If these games truly are better than my first dip into this masterful franchise though, then Jesus Christ, I am in for a good time.
Number 7!
Cave Story is a difficult game to recommend. It's both a game that everyone should play in their lifetime and a game you should never support due to the tragedy surrounding it. In essence, it's the grandfather of all 8-bit throwbacks, the fruit of a 10-year passion project under a one-man team, the sheer determination to bring this masterful tale to life, and the extreme level of polish that oozes from every aspect of gameplay. It is a true sight to behold. The world you explore, the characters you meet, the challenges you face, it's honestly one of the best experiences experiences you can receive in gaming today. However, I would not recommend playing this on the 3DS. Hell, I wouldn't recommend playing this on any home consoles through conventional means, under the circumstances of its publisher, Nicholas. Amongst countless other allegations that remain unresolved to this day, these bastards have essentially locked the creator, who goes by the pen name of Pixel, out of his own work of art under contract fuckery, and have denied him the possibility of making a sequel to this very day. Suffice to say, I don't feel comfortable giving Nicholas a single cent of my money. However, there is a solution. Cave Story is free to download from Pixel's own website, and there are plenty of translation patches out there. Suffice to say, this is one of the best games you can play on any console. However, you shouldn't play it on any console. Unfortunately, in this instance, I've got to give it to the PC Master Race.
Number 6.
I've got mad respect for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. This was my first glimpse into the world of 3D Zelda, and the story is most likely just as epic now as it was back in the day. However, I can't really call it my favourite Zelda game. No, that honour goes to none other than Majora's Mask. I was first introduced to this game through Game Theory, back when it wasn't clickbait algorithmic bullshit. From there, my fascination grew, and I craved a remake on the same level as Ocarina of Time. When it finally arrived, it was just as amazing as I'd hoped. Not every adventure game needs to be the grandest thing on the planet. Previous entries such as Another World are evidence of such. Sometimes, a much more intimate and personal experience is all the more satisfying. This is by far one of the most mature Zelda games, and I don't just mean that in the sense that it's violent or crass. It captures the essence of grief in every scenario, as well as the never-ending sense of dread against inevitable doom. It's a game with one of the most hopeless atmospheres I've ever come across, going above and beyond to hammer in that what you're doing is useless. Even so, you press on, turning back the clock again and again, spitting in the face of fate. You may not be able to fix everyone's problems, but you are at least in charge of your own destiny, and in doing so, maybe, just maybe, you can bring some light into the lives of those around you.
Number 5.
This was the game that truly cemented my place as a fan of Japanese RPGs. As an outsider looking in, I was craving games with a similar storytelling style to Fire Emblem Awakening, which, believe me, we'll get to. Unfortunately, the store clerk was slimy enough to claim that these were basically the same type of game. These two are completely different beasts, but such an occasion was enough to put me on the right track. This game is tailor-made to complement all of those classic traits of traditional JRPGs. The combat is infinitely customizable, but not in a way where you can outright break the game itself. The locales within this game are expertly designed, etching each chapter into your mind. Seriously, the art design is especially amazing, and perfectly complements the 3D gimmick of the console. And the music, my god, the music. I am so excited to see the composers return for the sequel, even though nothing will truly be able to top Bravely Second's opening theme. On the topic, Bravely Second isn't on this list in this spot because I didn't feel as much of a connection to the characters. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it didn't feel as tight-knit as the first game. I liked how the demo tied into the main game, but it wasn't that amazing as an experience. Bravely Default is way more memorable, even if you should never go for the true ending. Seriously, don't do it. In concept, it sounds amazing, probably being one of the best meta-narratives in gaming, but you have to replay the story 8 times. 8 times!
Number 4.
Hey, he's finally here! Woohoo! This game needs no introduction. It's pretty much the release that single-handedly saved this console from being an outright failure. I went into this game with zero expectations, being a freebie from Club Nintendo and all. I mean, it's just a Mario game. How good could it be? Oh my god! This game is basically the result of taking all of the amazing level design that they learned in Galaxy and cramming it into a streamlined package. The concept of a 2D Mario that plays in 3D doesn't sound that interesting, but by god, it plays it amazingly. Everyone has that Mario game that they feel immense nostalgia for, being the first one they played. For me, this is Super Mario 3D Land. Sure, I acknowledge that Mario Odyssey is by far the superior experience, but my nostalgia boner goes hard for this game. Legitimately, I hope they remake this game in the 3D World engine for Switch. More people deserve to play this, and its amazing experiences, even alongside its contemporaries. But that's to be expected, because let's be real here, Mario always delivers.
Number 3.
There are many franchises you won't see on this list. Kirby? I ain't interested in that shit. Pokemon? Bitch please, I checked out after X and Y. The passion just wasn't there anymore, and even to this day it seems to be the same thing. Shin Megami Tensei? From what little I've played of 4, I love it to death, but 5 hours of one game does not a series fan make. Especially since the one game I have played of theirs to a substantial degree isn't even on the same console. Do have most of them downloaded and ready to go though, but one franchise that I went in hard on was Ace Attorney, and for a time that's all I played. I went through pretty much every main series game with the exception of Apollo Justice due to lack of time, and each of them was an amazing experience. experience. None of them seemed to hit me as hard as Spirit of Justice though. After first playing through Dual Destinies, then going back to play through the trilogy, this game felt like the perfect way to cap off the series. And by God, I was crying at the end. I don't cry easily in media, it didn't even happen with my favorite game of all time, yet somehow I was bawling in the final case. Also kinda tearing up whilst writing the script. Wow, I don't even know why. I'll admit I hate the concept of visual novels. If I wanted to read a book, I'd go read a book. But against all odds, this series didn't just captivate me, it grabbed me by the balls. Thanks to its entries on the 3DS, especially with Spirit of Justice, I can safely say I am an Ace Attorney fan for life. Yes, the new mechanics are somewhat confusing. Yes, the new prosecutor doesn't hold a candle to some of the previous ones. Even so, this is a amazing game from a truly awe-inspiring series. This series needs a revival on the Switch, even with its lead writer stepping down. In fact, the reason I'm still hesitant to play Apollo Justice is because it'll be the last main series game I'll be able to play if this truly is the end. A friend of mine had a similar outlook on the Sherlock Holmes book series. He refused to read the last chapter because he didn't want to see it end.
A wise man once said, when you come to last page, close the book.
I didn't understand him until I started writing this and realized I feel the same way about this series. So please, Capcom, bring this series back. We are deserving of a new Ace Attorney experience, and to everyone else, you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not giving it a chance. Objection isn't just a silly catchphrase you shout as a joke, it echoes in your soul for the rest of your life after playing this game.
Number 2!
Fire Emblem Awakening is essentially the polar opposite of Chibi Robo Ziplash. When the chips were down and the development team was given one final chance to save the franchise, they didn't play it safe. They pulled out all the stops, took all the risks, and delivered a masterful strategy RPG. My exposure to this game was a rather interesting one. A friend of mine had gotten it for his birthday and had already finished it within a week. He let me borrow it for 2 months, upon which I became so enthralled with its storytelling, characters, world, and gameplay that I used my Christmas money to purchase a second copy, which I then played through a second time. This gives it a special place within my gaming journey. There are very few video game experiences that I've played to completion more than once. I can't say my 3DS knowledge on the franchise is complete because whilst I have played Fates, boring ass Fates, I've yet to give Shadows of Valentia a shot. As such, I can't call this the definitive Fire Emblem experience on the 3DS, but out of what I've played, it's still my favorite in the franchise. Yes, it's even better than Three Houses. It's one of the few games that I felt so connected with the characters that I went out and bought a Figma. Yes, a Figma. This is another game that would do great with a re-release on the Switch, not just thanks to its quality, but due to its cultural significance. In an age where these sorts of games were dying in the dumpster, Awakening rose to the top as one of the AAA experiences for the 3DS, and remains a favorite on the console even amongst those who don't like the anime style. Let me put it this way, there's a reason people complained about Byleth's reveal, whereas they didn't with Crom's. This game's pretty f***ing good, y'all. Now before making this list, I compiled every game that had an impact on me within the console's lifespan. Sadly, not every game made it onto this list, however that's what the glorious honorable mentions are for. In no particular order, Mario Kart 7. Yes, it's not as good as the DS version, and it sure as hell isn't as good as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but I still have fond memories of playing multiplayer online and in the twilight years of high school. It just needed that little push to be truly amazing, and in essence we eventually got that. WayForward continued to leave their mark on the system with the mighty Switch Force games. For me, the gameplay was alright, but oh boy was the soundtrack god tier. Seriously, how the f*** does Kaufman keep doing this? Also, it led to one of the greatest internet mashups of all time. Space Cuba is an amazing place to be. Edge was a simple puzzle game, but for some reason I found myself playing it for hours and hours. It's one of those simple but effective puzzle games with plenty of content to keep you occupied. For many, Mutant Mudds was a difficult game to get into, especially given its lack of story, in spite of its wonderful visuals. I personally had a lot of fun with it though, and I'm eager to try out the sequel when I get a chance. And who could forget Steel Diver Sub-Wars? The multiplayer-based spiritual successor to the 3DS's lackluster launch title was a surprise hit, with plenty of awesome strategy. It also taught me what 4649 means. I think several players mistook me for being Japanese when I found out. And now, what I consider to be the best game on the Nintendo 3DS, presenting... Anyone who knows me knows how much love I have for Xenoblade Chronicles. When the upgraded model of the 3DS was announced, I had no interest in it, let alone the game itself. However, through unfortunate waterlogging circumstances, I ended up swapping out. Then, several of my friends, both in real life and online, continued to pester me into playing it. I ignored them until there happened to be an E3 50% off sale, what I assume is the only time it was ever discounted. From the moment I booted it up, I was gobsmacked by every aspect. The world design, the combat, the story, the music, the characters, everything was, well, perfect. Many scorn the 3DS version for its bit-crushed graphics, but both me and many others were taken in by this game on this surprisingly powerful system. It took me 2 years to complete my first playthrough, as I ended up restarting at an early boss fight due to me not fully understanding the combat system, and me taking a break at a later level before realizing I needed to side quest in order to reach an appropriate level. After doing so, I continued to power through. Eventually, I finished the game on a boat ride between Santorini and Athens, and from that moment onward, I knew I had found my favorite game of all time. Sure, these days we are indeed blessed with the gorgeous Definitive Edition, an upgrade over not just this version, but all others. Even so, this version will always remain the one that started it all. I've completed this game 4 times since on different consoles, and each time it gets better. It's a game that every RPG fan needs to play at some point. If not on the 3DS, it's on the Wii U for $20. If not on the Wii U, the Switch remake is masterful. If not on the Switch, Dolphin Emulator can handle it pretty well. A world of adventure awaits you, and awaits me after I finish my big fat review that I'm only 10% finished with writing. In the meantime, just go play it. And the words, a world of adventure, apply to the 3DS as a whole. Even if you despise every single game on this list, there are hundreds more for you to enjoy. Hell, there are still hundreds more games for me to enjoy. That's why this isn't my definitive list. It's just a time capsule for what I know now. Especially with Etrian Odyssey, Shin Megami Tensei, Ace Attorney, and Fire Emblem, there are plenty of other experiences for me to try out. Eventually, I'll return to this topic, but for now, I just want to celebrate this masterful system. It may have had a rocky start, but it sure as hell left an impression by the time it was done. Besides, any console that has a game where you literally participate in hentai to develop children units is worth taking a look at. Wait, what? Big thanks to Flylash for making today's thumbnail. He's a great artist who I've been commissioning to do a couple of works here and there. You might see him on a future video, but for now, give him a look via the link in the description or via the Twitter handle on screen right now. Give him a commission if you're able, and until then, I'll see you guys next video.